In a coastal city teeming with merchant ships, sailors' tales, and the secrets of the oceans, a boy was born who would change the face of the world forever. Christopher Columbus was born, a child who knew that the sea was not a boundary, but a gateway to the unknown. From his earliest days, he listened to the whispers of the wind on the docks and gazed at the ships disappearing on the horizon, as if they held secrets that only he was permitted to reveal. He possessed a mad courage, an unquenchable dream, and a burning desire that neither facts nor the disapproval of scientists could extinguish. He saw the world in a way no one had seen before, a map in his imagination, a westward route no one had ever trod, and treasures waiting for those who dared to take the risk. A young boy from Genoa, raised amidst wool, spices and legendary stories, would later become the man who would unite continents, connect oceans and awaken European ambition, but he would also enter history through its darkest gates. This is the story of the man who believed that the impossible is just a beginning, and that the unknown is not an end, but the beginning of a new world. Christopher Columbus, between the genius of the adventurer and the brutality of the explorer, between myth and reality, between the greatest human achievement and the greatest human tragedy. Christopher Columbus was born in 1451 in Genoa, Italy, one of the most important trading ports on the Mediterranean coast at the time. Genoa was a vibrant, bustling city, teeming with merchant ships, sailors and travellers arriving from distant lands. These ships brought spices, silk, gold, and wondrous tales of unknown territories. It was in this maritime environment that Columbus's imagination was nurtured from a young age. He grew up in a modest family. His father was a wool merchant, while his mother managed the household. Despite the simplicity of his upbringing, the bustling ports open to the world served as his first school, where he learned to observe ships, read rudimentary maps, and absorb the stories and experiences of sailors who had travelled to far-off lands. From a very young age, Columbus was drawn to the sea. He spent long hours at the docks, watching ships sail and return, and listening intently to tales of distant islands, exotic peoples, and hidden treasures. These stories ignited a deep yearning for adventure and exploration within him. He became convinced that the sea was not a limit, but a vast pathway to unknown lands and new possibilities. Although his formal education was limited to basic reading, writing, and arithmetic, Columbus's curiosity drove him to study geography, astronomy, and navigation with determination. He immersed himself in the knowledge of the Renaissance, a period that revived scientific thought, navigation, and cartography in Europe, opening new horizons for strategic thinking and exploration. In the 15th century, Europe was on the cusp of a profound transformation known as the Age of Discovery. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 disrupted traditional land routes to Asia, creating an urgent need for alternative sea routes. European powers, especially Portugal and Spain, were eager to find new paths to the riches of the East, including spices, gold, and silk. Columbus closely followed the Portuguese explorations along the African coast and was inspired by the writings of Marco Polo, who depicted Asia as a land overflowing with wealth, precious metals, and exotic resources. These accounts reinforce Columbus's ambition to find a western route to Asia, believing that such a discovery could alter the balance of power and wealth in Europe. Based on flawed calculations, Columbus believed that the Earth was smaller than it actually is, and that sailing westward across the Atlantic would quickly lead him to the East Indies. While most scholars of his time rejected this idea, Columbus remained resolute. He was driven by a conviction that his voyage could change Europe's economic and political destiny and expand Spanish influence across the world. Columbus first sought support in Portugal, where he gained practical maritime experience, learned advanced navigation techniques, and became acquainted with caravels, small and fast ships ideal for long oceanic voyages. Despite his preparations and expertise, the Portuguese court rejected his plan, favouring the established route around the Cape of Good Hope. Undeterred, Columbus turned to Spain, spending years lobbying King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. He presented a multifaceted argument: the potential for spreading Christianity to new lands, the possibility of vast economic gains through trade, and the opportunity to increase Spain's global influence. After the fall of Granada in 1492, which marked the end of the Reconquista and freed Spanish resources from decades of warfare, the monarchs finally agreed to finance his expedition under the Treaty of Santa Fe. Columbus was granted prestigious titles, including Admiral of the Ocean Sea and Viceroy, and promised a share of any profits or treasures discovered. This royal backing enabled him to assemble a fleet and recruit experienced sailors for a journey into the unknown. In August 1492, Columbus set sail with 3 ships, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa María. The journey across the Atlantic was arduous, lasting several weeks. The crew faced fear, uncertainty, and signs of mutiny as days stretched into weeks without sighting land. Columbus maintained composure and authority, calming his crew and instilling hope by emphasizing the inevitability of reaching new lands. On October 12, 1492, they sighted land, the islands of the Bahamas. Columbus believed he had reached the East Indies and called the indigenous inhabitants Indians, unaware that he had arrived on continents previously unknown to Europeans. Columbus is credited with discovering the Americas for Europe, not because he was the first human to reach these lands, which had been inhabited for thousands of years, nor because he was the first European, as the Vikings had reached parts of North America centuries earlier, but because his voyages opened the door to sustained contact between the old and new worlds. His expeditions initiated the Colombian exchange, a period of widespread transfer of plants, animals, culture, people, technology, and ideas that profoundly reshaped global trade, economies, and ecosystems. However, Columbus's discovery also had a darker legacy. It paved the way for European colonization, exploitation, and violence, and introduced deadly diseases such as smallpox and measles to indigenous populations who had no immunity. This resulted in a catastrophic demographic collapse known as the Great Dying, drastically reducing populations across the Caribbean and later the Americas. Columbus and his men often treated indigenous peoples as subjects for conversion to Christianity and as labour sources, sometimes describing them as innocent, yet considering them culturally and socially inferior. This set the foundation for the policies of forced labour, encomienda systems, and harsh punishments that characterized early European colonialism. On his second voyage in 1493, Columbus commanded a larger fleet, intended to establish permanent settlements. He encountered fierce resistance from the indigenous peoples, shortages of food and resources, and outbreaks of disease, leading to violent confrontations. This journey revealed the harsh realities of European colonization. On his third voyage in 1498, he explored parts of South America, including the Orinoco River Delta, and began to realize the immense scale of the lands he had reached. But he also faced rebellions among Spanish settlers and mounting criticism of his governance. The fourth voyage in 1502 was his final expedition. It was plagued by storms, shipwrecks and disease, forcing Columbus to return to Spain exhausted, having accomplished little in terms of settlement or wealth acquisition. Columbus's administrative failures and the complaints about his brutality led to his arrest and return to Spain in chains in 1500. Although later released, he never regained his former political authority or influence. Until his death in 1506, Columbus remained convinced that he had reached the fringes of Asia. It was not until later that explorers like Amerigo Vespucci demonstrated that these territories constituted a new independent continent, later named America. Columbus's legacy is complex and controversial. He was a man of extraordinary courage and vision who connected continents and opened the world to new possibilities. Yet he also became the catalyst for centuries of European colonization that brought immense suffering, cultural destruction, and demographic collapse to indigenous societies. His life and voyages have inspired both admiration and criticism, sparking debates about history, identity, and justice. In recent decades, scholars and activists have challenged the traditional heroic narrative, highlighting the consequences for indigenous populations. This debate is reflected in public discourse, cultural representations, statues, celebrations, and even the creation of National Indigenous Peoples Day as a counterpoint to Columbus Day, seeking to honor the voices and histories of those who endured the consequences of European colonization. Ultimately, the story of Christopher Columbus encapsulates the contradictions of the Age of Discovery. The advancement of science, navigation, and global trade on one hand, and the onset of colonialism, exploitation, and cultural devastation on the other. His voyages reshaped the world, leaving a legacy that continues to influence global history, cultural memory, and debates over justice and historical interpretation. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.